Welcome to the Herd on West Exec, the podcast that discusses everything you need to know about working in the executive branch of the federal government. Hello, I'm Irv Dennis, board member and CFO at the American Cornerstone Institute. I served in the executive branch in the Trump administration as the CFO of HUD under Secretary Carson. This podcast is part of ACI's program called the Executive Branch in America, which is designed to educate what it's like to work in the federal government within the executive branch. In today's topic, we're going to be talking about the inner workings of the National Economic Council. And we are so fortunate to be joined by Brittany Baker, former Deputy Chief of Staff of the National Economic Council under Larry Kudlow. So, Brittany, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Thanks, Irv. I'm happy to be here.
And Brittany, when I look at your background and your experience, it's very extensive in working in government and public service and working with very prominent public figures, both in the Senate and the White House, and most notably, as you mentioned, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the National Economic Council under Larry Kudlow. And before we get into discussing all that, maybe spend a few minutes talking about your background and what were you doing before you had this experience within the White House National Economic Council?
Yeah, absolutely. So just backing up a little bit, even before coming to the White House, I think one of the things to note is I've just always been drawn to understanding how government and policy and the intersection between the two of those things shape the world around us. So growing up, I was really fascinated with how the decisions were made in Washington and how they could impact so many lives across the country. And I think this was really in part because I grew up in a very small manufacturing town in Alabama that was once considered at that time to be the sock capital of the world. And so as a rising senior in high school, that all changed. So that was around the time that the Central American Free Trade Agreement, or as it's called, CAFTA, was passed in Congress, and then the President Bush at the time signed that into law. And so the industry that I had grew up witnessing as the backbone to my hometown's economy was gone, and it was moved overseas. So for me, this was truly the first memory I have where I remember seeing the effects of the public policy and how the impacts it could have on everyday American lives. And by that, I just mean seeing the ripple effects of those policies take place right in front of me, because both of my paternal grandparents lost their jobs from the sock industry, and they had had these jobs for more than 50 years. So for me, it really hit as a pivotal moment, especially just having having my family impacted by that major policy decision. And so at the time, I didn't envision myself going into public policy, but I think it was probably just studying political science in college, and then my early work experiences really made me realize that I wanted to be involved in helping shape policy decisions moving forward in some capacity. And so I think that sparked a fire for me that began to burn. And so that's essentially how I chose to pursue public policy. And then from there, I studied political science in college and went on to intern in DC, and it just began to grow from there. So,
well, I see your background includes some time in the Senate, and I do want to talk about that at some point as we go through this conversation. But how did you end up finding your way into the White House, the National Economic Council?
So my journey to the White House, and specifically the NEC, it wasn't linear by any means. It was really fueled by a series of opportunities where I combined my passion for policy and communications with my desire to make a positive impact. So because of these different experiences that I had, it really became clear that I wanted to help shape policies that made a meaningful difference in our communities and across the country. So that led me first to a DC internship while I was in college on the Hill, so serving in the House. And then ultimately, my move to DC for my first job after college, working in the Senate in a policy role. And from there, it was really just different opportunities I had in the Senate. So I was there for about 5 years. I started working for my home state senator from Alabama at the time, I moved over from the personal office after about 2 years and began working on the Senate Budget Committee as an analyst. So that was completely different work. And then from there, I ended up working for the Senate Majority Whip at the time, who was a senator from Texas. So I came in as his speechwriter. I wore a dual hat as the deputy press secretary. And, I made that shift from policy to communications, which some staffers do. There aren't a lot of them, but it does happen from time to time. And I always enjoyed writing. So the speech writing, for me, it came really easily. So honing the voice of a 60-something-year-old attorney general or former attorney general from Texas for a 24-year-old at the time was a bit harder, but it was a welcome challenge. And ultimately, I look back as that role was really pivotal in my career. I think that was probably the first job where I faced a lot of pressure to perform on a higher scale daily. The stakes were a lot higher. And so looking back, I see that role for me as a time in my life where I really grew up in my career. And that was special for me getting to serve in the Senate for 5 years. And so I think looking back now on all those experiences and how I got to the White House, it was clear that, working on the Hill, I built two things. So one, I built a really great network of people just from all across the country, getting to work with so many different people, in the two personal offices I worked in for different states, and then also working on the budget committee. And then also the second thing, the expertise that I needed, like unbeknownst at the time, working on the budget committee really put me into a similar world that NEC shares with, fiscal policy, economics, and that type of thing. And so ultimately, I think all those experiences added up to help prepare me to serve on the NEC. And so going back to your original question, whenever I got a call about interviewing with the incoming director for the NEC in early 2018, who was Larry Kudlow, I jumped on it and ended up being his first hire. So we both went into the White House together in spring of 2018.
Brittany, you mentioned something there that I really want to make sure the audience understands. It's such a powerful thing when you go into the economic branch and work in the White House or the Senate. That's just part of your background. The networking that you can draw from that for the remaining of your career, your life is unbelievable. And you probably don't know much about my background, but I spent 40 years at Ernst & Young and loved every minute of it. Me going into the executive branch was kind of a retirement, giving back a little bit and keeping my mind active and doing mission related work. And the networking that I develop, everything I do now is networked out of Washington, D.C. in my time in government, and it's a phenomenal way to do that. It's a great resume build. So I always tell folks when I do guest lecturing, if you ever have an opportunity to do that, it'll pay all kinds of benefit throughout your career in any form. Speaking, let's go back to the National Economic Council. You had so many great experiences in that. Maybe share with the audience some of your primary responsibilities and roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came in, like I said, at the NEC in 2018. So May of 2018, I joined as a special assistant to the director in the front office of the NEC, which is in the West Wing. So there's a couple of staff that operate from the West Wing, while the rest of the team is housed across the street from West Exec in the EEOB. And so my role really was to support and help ensure the director's priorities were executed efficiently. This involved managing the director's schedule, which, as you can imagine, being the top economic advisor to the president, he gets hundreds, thousands of meeting requests daily from CEOs of banks to energy companies to his foreign counterparts from other countries. And there's only so many hours in the day. Prioritizing those meetings was really a headache, and then figuring out which ones, to make the time for. And that's just externally facing. Internally facing, there was also a balance of coordinating internal meetings among other senior advisors and cabinet officials, because they're always trying to meet with the economic advisor, right, to discuss the policies that they're wanting to advance or the policies that they're wanting to get in front of the president. And so that played a major role in the first few months I was in the White House. just figuring out which way was up and down and trying to sleep a little bit, I think, in the midst of all of that. And then I moved into an advisor role where I was more deeply involved in helping shape things and providing strategic guidance on everything that crossed our desk in the day-to-day. And then from there, I was elevated finally to the deputy chief of staff at the NEC, where my role really expanded to including overseeing just all day-to-day operations on a more granular level at the NEC. And that honestly just included everything and anything. I often describe my role as being an air traffic controller and making sure that the planes are taking off and they're landing and they're not crashing into each other. But maybe a better way to describe it is I acted as a bridge between the director and other White House offices. And because our team was physically divided, some of us in the West Wing, some of us not, I was a bridge to our team as well. And so it really was my job to ensure that our team was aligned on what the director was asking of them and that we coordinated with our other White House offices effectively. So all in all, I wore a lot of hats and I really became Larry's person for getting things done. I managed his communications and media engagement with the White House comms team. I monitored the market frequently every day when he was in between meetings or in the Oval Office, and generally would be running around the White House complex with him in between meetings, trying to get things accomplished and asks taken care of, which the military office at the White House calls 18A because the White House sits on 18 acres. And so that's a fun fact. We had a lot of ground to cover, both figuratively and literally. And then I'll just say lastly, that one of my favorite things in my role was getting to staff the director on travel with the president as part of the U.S. delegation. That was a really unique thing that I look back on. I learned a lot because you're really learning on the go. And one of the first trips I staffed him on, we traveled with the Secretary of the Treasury to London and had a lunch set up for us with their counterparts at number 10. And we were trying to set up a US-UK economic working group. And so I just remember it was very surreal. It was August. And so it was like really hot. It wasn't raining in London, which is what you think. But also it was like the first time I realized that Europeans really do not like air conditioning. And so it was very hot in the room. But all joking aside, it was a really cool experience and like I said, a really unique role. And so I look back with very fond memories for getting to serve my country and also getting to serve with Larry Kudlow, who I just love and can't say enough good things about.
No, good. It's interesting. When I went to the executive branch, I knew nothing about government, but it's amazing how fast you learn and the people that you learn from. And it's a fascinating world, very different than the private sector. Working for a corporation, but it's and you're right. You have a lot of fun experiences that you're not expecting, and it sounds like you had some terrific ones. Brittany, maybe spend a few minutes on how is economic development formed in the White House, and how do you determine the primary strategic objectives and what's the basis for forming that and making it happen in the United States?
So I'll start with explaining really what the NEC does, because I don't know if many people know that. But for those who don't know, there are only 3 entities that coordinate policy for the president in the White House: the NEC, so that's the National Economic Council, the NSC, that's the National Security Council, and then the DPC, which is the Domestic Policy Council. And the NEC was originally created in 1993 by President Clinton, so it hasn't been around that long. And he created it to help centralize economic decision-making in a way that mirrored the role of the NSC and how it advises on national security matters. And so the main role of the NEC in the White House is shaping and executing the president's economic policy. So what does that really mean? I love to use analogies, and I was just at a Texans football game recently. And so I'll just explain it saying, imagine that the NEC is the head coach of an NFL football team, and then the other parts of government, so and cabinets like the Treasury Department, the Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, Department of Energy, Interior, even in USTR. Those are all of the players involved, and each player has a special role. However, that in order to win the game, they need to work together. And so it's really the NEC director's role as that head coach to help coordinate the team, to share the information with the players, solve problems as they arise, as they always do, and make sure the game plan, or in this case, the economic plan, is working and winning for the president and ultimately the American people who elected him. And so, as everyone knows, one of the most important people in an NFL franchise is the owner of the team. And so that's, at the end of the day, that's who calls the shots. That's who picks the coach, fires the coach. And so for the purposes of this, the president is the owner and always has the final say. And so, and I'll just add, the process is highly collaborative, and it requires constant and lots of communication between the White House offices, the departments, like Treasury and Commerce and others. And then once a policy direction was set, it was the job of the NEC to coordinate with those respective agencies to ensure implementation, right, and monitor the progress and provide feedback. Or, in the case where you need Congress's approval to pass the law, it's a lot of coordination with the senators and the members of Congress. So to put really simply, the NEC is ultimately a coordinator, a convener, and enforcer for all economic policy for the president. And then going even further, there's beyond the director, there's a lot of staff. There's about 30 people at the NEC, all subject matters on different issues. Some are domestic, some are international focused. And so they all are working with their counterparts within the agencies to bring these, issues into fruition ultimately. So it's it's a lot to do in 4 years for a presidency. So as you imagine, it's working around the clock.
So when you go through it, we're going to talk about transition a little bit, which is very topical, as you know now. As you start to ramp up in a beginning of the administration, it's got to be a lot of coordination with the president, and I suspect there's continue to be coordination. But how quickly do you grasp what the president wants and his goals and his management agenda? Is that all flushed out before you start on January 21 or in the sign-in date? And can you describe that process a little bit? I got to imagine that everyone's pretty much on the same page with what the president wants before you get started, so there's no foot faults as you get in the beginning of the administration.
So I think I didn't start day one in the first administration, but I think having not served as president in the White House before, there was a lot of not knowing what to do. However, I think given the president's already served in office before, there's going to be a lot of people he's chosen and surrounds himself with to go in on day one and start picking up the baton and moving forward on things he was already doing. So we should expect to see a lot more of the same in good ways. So those policies people liked, they should expect to see more of those. And ultimately, that's what the American people overwhelmingly voted for. So for Trump to come in and help restart the economy and to make America wealthy again and to be winning again.
Brittany, that's that's a good understanding of the transition, and you're right. It's the American people do have a vision now of what he wants. He's been very clear of that throughout pretty much his whole life, and we've got the opportunity to America had the opportunity to judge that from 4 years prior and what they expect now. So I think we all have a good vision of that. How hard is it, or how difficult, or maybe it's not difficult, to unwind the prior administration's economic policies and then start embedding Donald Trump's economic policies? Is that a complicated process, or is it? I know I'm a little bit done through executive orders, I guess, but as you mentioned, some of it does require congressional support. So how difficult is it to just transition from one president's agenda to another?
Yeah, and so absolutely on the deregulation front, as you probably know, and others will soon find out, Republicans tend to deregulate, Democrats tend to overregulate. So, like his first administration, you can expect to see more deregulation from the last 4 years, just as he did in his first term with the previous 4 years from that. And so, I think going in on day one, there's going to be a lot of executive orders signed. I think that I read somewhere that he's already drafted maybe over 100 of them to sign on day one and in office. And so I think step one will really be to start unwinding all the overreach that the Biden administration put in. And then step two is making sure that we create a regulatory regime that prioritizes, again, what the American people voted for and seeing growth and opportunity.
It seems like a very complicated role, and it's a very important counsel for the president for America. What would you say were your biggest challenges in the role, or that you experienced?
That's a great question. Just being completely honest, I think one of the biggest challenges is, well, there's many. So there's the stress, the high stakes, but I think one challenge is just working with all the different personalities involved. There's so many different people and everyone has different backgrounds and things. And so it also makes it one of the best things, right, is having all those different minds come together. I think one of the biggest challenges for me was, trying maybe to do my job and not get fired. I think that at the end of the day, that's what everyone wanted. And, it doesn't help, I think, if there ends up being people that don't like you and they're actively trying to get you fired. So I think there's a lot of different challenges involved, but I think it's just really probably a challenge that you face in a normal job or just in life in general, is just the consistency to show up every day and continue to try and do a good job, even when, you have something like the global pandemic happening or unfold in front of you. So, a lot of challenges. That's a great question.
Brittany, I found there's a lot of landmines in Washington, and I did not know Washington. I didn't know government. I spent my time mostly in the commercial sector at Ernst & Young for 4 years. But it is challenging. It is a different world. It's very, very political in almost all regard. So I was very fortunate that I had an advisor that walked me through Washington without blowing my feet up, stepping on something I shouldn't step. But having said that, once you work through that complexity, there are people you can trust that can help you and guide you. And I found that the networking on that is very valuable. But I also found, and I'd like your perspective on this, I also found working for the American people through the hard times. And in our administration, as you know, we had the national disasters we had to deal with. And at HUD specifically, Puerto Rico came to mind. We had the 31-day shutdown created its own set of complexities to make sure that we continue the mission to which we were serving. And then also the COVID with the CARES Act. I mean, they were three very complicated times. And I tell people that I speak to and guest lecture with that the American people would be very proud of the level of effort that goes into how the politicals and the career people serve. It doesn't get a lot of attention. But I found the mission-driven work very, very satisfying, and I enjoyed every day that I was there. And you're right, you have all the complexities and the pressure of the job and the pressures of politics and what goes, some of the nonsense that goes on in Washington. But at the end of the day, I just loved every minute of it because it was mission-driven work. And did you have a similar experience with that?
Absolutely. And, just sharing your story about finding your tribe and mentors that can really, you can really lean in and be honest with and get advice from. I have so many of those people from the Hill and the White House that I still call on today, for challenges in the private sector. And Larry became one of those people for me. I'll tell you, I think you'll enjoy hearing this short story, but I was often, I had my husband's grandfather served as the White House chief of staff for 2 different presidents, which is a really cool thing. I always asked him for advice when I was working in the White House, and I would ask him, what he thought were the biggest challenges and things. And then I would share some stories, his always outweighed mine because his main line was, when you're the White House chief of staff, it's all hard. Like nothing's easy. But I think that's true. There's really nothing easy that came to our desk in the White House. Like it was all challenges. But he did share a story when he was the chief of staff to Reagan. There was a lot of people that didn't want him to be in that role because he had ran a campaign against Reagan and for multiple reasons. And an advisor wrote a letter saying, here's all the reasons that Jim Baker is trying to undermine you, Mr. President. And Ronald Reagan got the letter, wrote back to the person and said, there's a lot of people trying to undermine me, but Jim Baker's not one of them. And he wrote back, here's all the reasons I know why he's not. And, he said at the end of the day, the president had his back and it didn't matter what happened. And so, I shared there was some challenges, people trying to get you fired, what have you. Like all that happens in politics to be sure. But at the end of the day, I remember Larry sharing with me once, we talked and I think I was worried I was going to get fired for whatever reason. And he asked me why I was worried and we talked and he was like, don't worry about it. He was like, these are just things you let roll off your back, He was like, don't let the ankle biters get you down. And so I always kept that in mind and he always had my back. And that really made showing up every day so much easier, especially, like I said, when everything you're showing up for is so difficult. So,
I've always believed, once you understand your North Star, just keep following it and the rest of it is just noise. And whatever the consequences are, they are, but just stay true to your own values and follow your North Star. And then everything generally does work out in a positive way.
I like that, your North Star.
Brittany, we're almost out of time here, but any parting thoughts to our audience and thinking about how they ought to think about public service as part of their career and as they go through life?
Yeah, well, I will just say it's an exciting time, especially for Republicans to be thinking about public service or, going in and serving. And also just sharing from my experience, public service has been an incredibly rewarding career. And, I've done it in kind of at a lot of different angles. I'm still serving essentially in public service at my current job. I work in the private sector, but my clients are all public service. And I think I just say it's a real chance to make a real difference and get to work on issues that affect millions of people. And, we've talked about it's not always easy, but I think the impact that you could end up having is very much worth it. So I'd say for, anyone considering, don't hesitate, just dive in and you'll find the opportunities to grow and to learn and to contribute in ways that you can't imagine. And so, working in the White House was one of the best experiences of my life and of my career. And, the best of that was getting to serve the country that I love. And so even when it's hard, I think on the hardest days, you can really remember why you started and that you're serving something so much bigger than yourself. And so I want to end with just sharing a quote. I'm going to pull it up. This is something I kept in my desk. Someone gave this to me on my first day in the White House. And when I actually left the White House in January of 2021, I left it in my desk with a note to the incoming Biden staffer, whoever took that desk in the West Wing, sharing it with them because I thought it was something worthy of passing on. So this is from a post. I'm just going to read an excerpt in the Washington Times from January 21st on 2001. It's from President Bush's White House press secretary, Tony Snow. And he wrote, we Washington insiders never tire of inaugural pomp and pageantry, particularly at times when power changes hands and a new president takes up residence at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's heady stuff, waking up one day and realizing, hey, I'm going to go work in the White House. The White House, the gravitational center of the free world, the place of dreams and imagination. It goes on later to say, don't get a big head. If you lose your humility, someone will return it with compound interest. Stop one day and pinch yourself. The White House, with all its pressures, intrigues, triumphs, betrayals, joys, and disappointments, is the most magical place you will ever work. Look out at the gates at the people who slow as they pass, trying to get a glimpse of someone, anyone. They know what you're likely to forget. You're blessed. Work hard, be honest, understand the honor of your calling. Leave no room for regrets, for someday in the not so distant future, you will be back where you started, on the sidewalk with the other folks, gawking at the grand, glorious, mysterious place where Lincoln walks at night and our highest hopes and dreams reside. So that's definitely worth going and looking up and reading the entire article, but that was just like a little excerpt. And again, it was something I read a lot because he gives a lot of great tips in there on really how to survive in Washington.
Yeah.
So,
Brittany, that's a wonderful way to end this conversation. And I really appreciate you bringing that up and highlighting that. It was a great quote, and I'm listening to it and getting some chills actually, because that's exactly you feel when you get to, when you're there working, and at the end of the day you reflect on what you did. And so thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your story. I find you very inspirational, actually, in your public service and all that you've done, and more importantly, all you're going to do. This will be your life, feel it and your passion. So thank you for helping make America great, and I appreciate your time today. I know our audience got a lot out of this conversation, and really, really do appreciate your time.